Okay, we have completed the storm drain development training set. So now let's go ahead and do the next one, which is to take that storm drain data and apply it to the Flow 2D system. So we're just going to convert it from standard set of shapefiles into Flow 2D ready data. So the thing that we'll start with is to select the components from the shapefile. And then once we have that selected, we'll auto assign the conduits to their nodes. We'll show you how that works when we get in there. Import the rating tables for the type 4s. Schematize the storm drain system. Export the INP file. Export the rest of the project. Run the simulation and create the backup. So you'll see that most of the work goes into the development of the shapefiles. The setup is actually quite simple. Okay, let's start with so we have our 3 shapefiles here, and they actually need to be right here, just note that. And then we collapse the widgets and open the storm drain editor. Make sure that you have the check of the storm drain switch on. Select this button for the components. And I have already done this, so my fields are already filled. So I'm going to go through a few of these, but I think that you'll see that this is pretty straightforward. So once you select the name, it won't necessarily be the first field. In this case, it is. The inlet type, you can see that's not the next field. Invert elevation, but they're pretty obvious. So when you name your fields and you build your system, make these names kind of obvious, kind of match these. Maximum depth, that's the only one that's a little bit weird because it's the final depth, not the depth, the other depth, it's the final depth. And then fill out the rest of them. I don't know if you remember or not, but we did add a clogging factor and a time for clogging, but we didn't put any data in there, so we don't need to choose those. Outfalls, the same thing, just select and fill out the fields. Make sure you change it to outfalls. Change it to conduits and fill out the fields here. These 2 fields, you have to have them in here for the process to work, but the data itself is not, it doesn't have to mean anything because we will auto assign the conduits here. And then just click assign the selected features to the appropriate layers. That's an automatic process. So if the process completes and doesn't have any issues, you'll get this notification that the next thing that you need to do is to schematize the conduits. But before I hit the schema button, I want to use and to apply my auto assign tool. So I'm going to click the auto assign button and click yes. And then once that's complete, I'll zoom in and I'll just show you what that did. Okay, so here's my conduits. And if I select, well, actually, I'm actually done with these 3 because the conduits are now in the correct layers. So I will select this conduit and use the ID tool to select one of them. So if you see from here that the conduit name is C706 and it's connected to I3157 upstream and I3158 downstream. It also has an arrow that's pointing in the flow direction. You can kind of see the little arrowhead down here. And so if you use the storm drain nodes and you hit ID on those, you'll see that indeed the upstream node is 157 and the downstream node is 158. So I'll click that again and you'll see upstream node 157 and downstream node is 158. So that's how that tool works. Now we're finished with that. The next step is to import the rating tables. So click the button here. And the rating tables are in the project data, storm drain, rating tables. So for the type 4, there's a lot of head walls in this area. So for the type 4, you either need a rating table or a generalized culvert equation data. The plugin only does rating tables right now. We're putting the generalized culvert equation into it in our next development cycle and that, so that should be ready in a month or 2. So we're going to Control A to select all of these rating tables and click Open, and that will automatically assign them to each of the type for inlets. And it also it also sends a little report to the location of those rating tables so you can see that it selected them all. So I'm going to open that back up. Whoops. Over here, and you see here's my type 4 rating tables, and there is the warning file. And so if any of those were not identified correctly, it will list it here. And so then you could go and find the one that wasn't identified correctly. Okay, the next step will be to schematize the data. So that's the button here. So when I click the schematize button and then I click OK, it just tells you that it was done. If you get an error, it'll give you an error. And then over here in the storm drain group, what it does is it just converts that data from the Flow2D data to the, from the user data to the Flow2D schema layers. So it sets everything up and it fills out all the tables. And now this data is ready to export. So, and that's the next step. So we'll start by exporting the Imp file. And we want to put this in the run project, okay, because this will be running the data. I already have one in here and it's already running. So I'm just going to leave it alone and put this into another folder just so that you can see the process. So let's just call this storm drain video, just so that you can see the process. And we'll just go inside here and name the file SWMM, and it's a SWMM.inp, has to have that name or else Flow2D can't find it. Over here, if the fields are grayed out, that means you don't need that data. It's already hardwired. You don't need to add that. The reporting step, that's the time step at which the results are output to the output file. That you can 0.06 is what we have set our Flow2D reporting step to. You can set this to something different. That's okay. I'll leave the rest of these as default. If you want to know more about those, you can reference those in the storm drain data file, or sorry, storm drain manuals. And click OK here, and this will let you know that it exported this number of components. Now that that is out, I'll take a quick look at that just to show you what that looks like. Project data, coastal training, export folder, storm drain video, and you see here that we have two files, the INP, which is just your kind of standard INP, except it's a little bit different because we don't have certain structures that, like the catch basins and stuff like that, or the subcatchments, and we don't have a rain. We don't need any of that stuff. Flow2D doesn't need that because the surface model provides all that information. And then it tells you that it was created by Flow2D so that you know how this was made. You can also add in other information to this file if you'd like. We also have the INI file. I'll just open it with Notepad. And you can see here that it tells you the version of this GUI, swim GUI that you need to look at this data. And this INI file just allows you to map that data and animate that data once you get that into the storm drain GUI. I don't need this. Let's close that up. And now that we've done that, the next step is to export the rest of the data. We don't need to turn on the storm drain switch because we did that over here. But we do need to export the rest of the .dat files. So we'll just put those here into the new storm drain folder. Actually, it's not going to go here. I'll show you. I'll click OK. And then that goes into project export storm drain video, select the folder, and that will export. And you'll see as your projects get bigger, this process takes longer. So you may not always want to export all of those files because they're not changing. For example, the rain.dat file did not change. The infill.dat file did not change. It hasn't since we made those at the very beginning of the project. The arf.dat file doesn't change. So if you don't want to export those every single time, you can just make a standard baseline run folder, and then you can just save that data in there because then it won't take so long to export. And let me show you how you do that. So you click on that, and then you could turn off rain and turn off infiltration and turn off, oh, I don't even have my reduction factors on because that's in the next lesson. Turn those off and then export it. Turn off Mannings and Topo because they didn't change, and then it'll export much faster. And then what you can do is you can just keep like a run folder with all the data in it, and then just add the new files to that data. So what did we get from that? We got the swimflow.dat, the swimflow.rt, the swimoutf, the cont.dat that has that new switch turned on, and nothing else changed. And of course, you know these two. We already looked at these two. So we have these are the folders that changed. Oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to go like this, and nothing else did. So once your project gets really big, just keep that in mind. Now we need to run it. So you have two ways to run this data. You can either run it from here, or you can run it the way that I like to run it by going to the Flow2D Pro folder, getting the Run for Project folder and copying that, putting it into your storm drain folder, and double-click flowpro.exe. Now the engine will stay with the project. And I am just going to start it so that we see that it's error-free. And then once we see that, it's already running on my computer in another spot. So I'll just shut it down as soon as we see that it passed its tests. It's going to take a bit longer because I already have one running. So you can run more than one, run on your computer at a time, but the bigger they get, the less efficient that will be. So it's not a big deal. I could run these both at the same time and they would both finish fine, but they won't be as efficient as if I ran them individually. Still okay to do it. I'm going to close this down now because I don't need it. And we'll go ahead and let this one finish. Let's see where it is. It's about 4 hours in, so that's good. We'll let it finish, and this one will just go away. And that is the end of exporting the storm drain, but we still need to save and preserve the data. So save your project. Well, I like to just zoom to the layer and then save the project. I don't need these anymore, so I'm just going to uncheck them. And this can stay on. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't need culvert data anymore, so I can uncheck that and save, and then I'll close it. Oh, this one's done. We'll just let that close down. And let's get out of here and go back to the project folder, again, coastal training. And again, we closed that so we can make a backup of it now. And it's really important to make a backup after that first storm drain, because if you kind of messed something up or you further down the road, you want to have a recovery point after you, especially after you do storm drains, after you do channels, you know, things that take a bit more work. So I'm going to right click, zip, send to this. No, sorry, I'll use this one, the same one you should have, compressed files. And then once that's complete, we'll name that SDOK, and I can just pop that into my backup files. I probably already have one in here. Yeah, I renamed it so that I could send it to you so that you would have it. And back to coastal training, and double click or go back into your QGIS, open it back up, and then load the data from QGIS. Okay, that will take a little bit longer to open because your model is running. Sorry, your model is running. So I went ahead and paused the video, but it shouldn't take long to load. It just took a bit of time to initialize. And then I'll click yes to load the model, and everything should be right back where we left off and ready for the next lesson, which will be to either review the data or move on to lesson 4. So I'll go ahead and stop the recording, and you can continue on with the class.